Conversations with Iris. Here's your host, my loving wife, Iris.
Hola, mi gente bonita. Hello, beautiful people, and welcome back to Conversations with Iris, where conversation meets heart. That corazón we always talk about. I love bringing you guys these wonderful conversations mixed with that Latin pizzazz and that sazon. This is a space where we talk about that necessary healing that we need. We talk about growth, where we talk about those hard things with grace. And today's conversation is just a conversation about anybody that has ever felt stuck, ashamed, or caught in the cycle they were or they swore by. And they're like, I have to get out of this one last time. This conversation is definitely about you because we're going to talk about something serious that we call addiction, recovery, resilience, and what really it takes to build a sustainable and meaningful life. So, this conversation is definitely for those that are seeking that, or for anybody tuning in. And as well, I want to give a shout out to my listeners. Thank you for continuing to download, listening, and sharing these episodes. I know they resonate with you. These episodes have the ability to change your life. Let me tell you guys something. I just had somebody reach out to me, and I said this on last Friday now. I had somebody reached out to me and they were like, wow, your episode changed my life. It made a difference for me. Wow, it made me think about my purpose in life. So ask yourself that. If this episode changed you, share it with somebody that needs to hear it. It's all about that love. It's all about raising awareness, and it's all about growing. And I want to continue to grow with you. Okay. Keep that in mind. But going back to our conversation today, I have to tell you guys a little bit about my guest today because I want you to know that recovery isn't just about quitting something, it's about becoming someone. Let me repeat that. Recovery is about becoming someone better. And today's guest, sorry, understands that deeply. She is an internationally certified addiction counselor with more than a decade of experience, a master practitioner and trainer of NLP, clinical hypnotherapy, EFT time techniques, and a life success coaching. She offers all those great things in Compass. And what I like about her is that she blends that clinical expertise, which I love, with systematic healing, bringing mind, body, and spirit into that necessary balance that we need to kind of get it together there. And she believes that there's no one size fits all paths to recovery. Every recovery path is different. And she walks beside her clients with resilience and that grace that I love. Without further ado, please help me welcome Jen Foot. Welcome, bienvenidos to Conversations with Iris, Jen.
Thank you for having me, Iris. I'm just excited to dive in and see what we discover today.
Yes, I'm excited too. And girl, you have all these wonderful hats that you wear. I mean, you are internationally a certified addiction counselor with more than a decade of experience, which I love that, as I mentioned. And I just want to start with you because addiction work is not easy, Jen. It really is, and it requires that depth, that compassion, boundaries, and that strength that we need. But what overall drew you to addiction counseling? Let's start there.
Well, I think my personal story, I always believe sometimes our life becomes spiritual assignments for us. Like we don't always necessarily choose the life that we want or have, but it chooses us. And that's exactly what happened to me. I was born into a middle class family in the late 50s in England, London, England. And I was born in an era where children should be seen and not heard. And there was a lot of dysfunction and chaos in my family through no fault of anyone's. It just was. And I lost my sister as a young child when I was 4 years old, and she was a baby at the time. And that sent our family spinning. And from there,
Oh,
I had an older stepbrother who was older than me by 6 years, and there was sexual abuse in the family as well. And so that really was a defining moment for me in my life. And from there, things like I learned to be a chameleon. I think that, we learn how to insulate ourselves in situations so that we can feel safe. So, who do you want me to be in order to feel safe? And that's what I spent my life doing in my early primary years because I recognize that no one's there to help me navigate through this. And so that was
mm,
really the beginning of a trajectory where substances were involved as a young teenager. And from there, it was very chaotic for me. And so when I finally found recovery in 1993 in my early 30s, what happened was I disclosed fully what was going on with my history, and nobody was interested. They go, "You have a substance issue. That's what we're going to focus on." And so I thought I was doing the right thing. So I was a good student and I learned and I
Mhm.
did everything I was supposed to. But
Yeah.
I had an epiphany 7 years later. So I'm now 7 years sober, and my life looks picture perfect from the outside, but inside, like I have a husband, I have 3 children, I have a career, I'm sober, I look like I have the life many people would want, and yet I felt like I wanted to kill myself. I was depressed. I was frozen in my body.
Oh my.
I was so detached from my emotions, and I thought there's got to be a better way. And that sent me, that very defining moment sent me on a quest to find out how we really get well beyond the drugs and alcohol. So, what's next once we put those substances down?
Wow. Wow. And that's definitely beyond that alcohol and that substance abuse there. And let me ask you, what is it that keeps you passionate after all these years? I mean, definitely you came from a broken family and you slowly work your way up to recovery, but what is that little passion that you look back and you say, "God, I love what I do."
It's interesting you say that, because what keeps me passionate just about everything in life, and I think that's the opposite of where I was in life. Like I felt like my life was so consumed. Like I think when you feel that you have something that's troubling one, whether
Yeah.
it's a failed relationship, a health issue, substance, whatever it may be, you feel like that cloud is front and center and it follows you around all over your life. So it becomes so all consuming. But part of
Mhm.
recovery is getting well, and when we get well, that recedes. Sometimes things never go away. Sometimes they do, but sometimes we, like fear, for example, it never goes away. We're just going to learn to live with it. And what happens is it recedes into the background. And I think that's exactly what happened with my history. So now I'm passionate about everything and anything. I'm very tenacious by spirit. But what really, and it's always the same, I see the brilliance in the people I work with every single time. When I sit down across the room from them, I think to myself, if only they could see themselves, they'd never play so small. But when the lights click, and I'm a very compassionate practitioner because that's what I needed and I didn't get. So,
Mhm.
and I think it's innate for me, it comes easily. So, for me, is to be a compassionate practitioner and help them see that wonder and that magical quality that I see in them, help them find that within themselves. And when they
Mm.
do, there's no better feeling in the world.
Oh my
Absolutely.
God. I love that. I love that. And I could just hear the passion when you talk about the therapy, you being a passionate practitioner. And I love how you mentioned you see the brilliance in people. And when they find it, it's like an aha moment. It's not amazing. I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
think this is the way I'm pertaining. Like I see it like, oh my God, I am brilliant. I can do this. I can overcome this. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about because you speak about shame too, like
Oh my
breaking the
God. Mm-hmm.
cycle of shame. It like follows us everywhere. And so many people struggling with that addiction feel like they're moving one step forward, but two steps backwards, you know? So why is shame such a powerful barrier in recovery? I mean, it kind of follows you like a backpack, but is that something they need to like deal or learn how to live with? I mean, we have to kind of get away from that, right?
Absolutely. Well, there's two layers of shame here. Firstly, there's systemic shame, which is embedded in the recovery model of addiction recovery, which is starting to move away from that. But when I was in my early years of recovery in the early 90s, it was very different, obviously. So, systemic shame is the stigma. Like, stigma is the number one barrier why people do not get help. If you have any other illness, whether it's cancer, heart disease, or even a mental health issue, one would get help much quicker than if you have a drug or substance issue, because it is so rooted in, like, if, well, you should know better. It's not logical. If people understood it was logical, people wouldn't do
Mhm.
certain things. They wouldn't let their lives blow up to the degree that it does and lose everything. And this spectrum on all conditions, and I believe that no different with addiction. And then there's the personal shame. which comes partly from intergenerational trauma, which I'll address in a minute, but also
Yeah.
systemic still. So when I say personal shame, I grew up in a household where children should be seen and not heard. You didn't have an opinion. It didn't really matter. Like, in other words, they were just really doing the best they can. Like, if you were crying, you were told to pull it together. What's the matter with you?
Mm-hmm.
In other words, did we forget that we're human and we have emotions and feelings?
Mm.
That narrative was never something that was even welcome back then. So I think, thank God, it's different now, and that can recognize that there's our innate human qualities within ourselves, and there's a softening
Yeah.
around that. And especially, I think it's even further stigmatized for men in particular. um, so it's really part of what we have learned. And true recovery to me is an unlearning process of the parts that didn't work for us, or the things that were handed down to us that really no longer serve us. They may have served us as a young child, but not as an adult in healthy relationships. So yes, there's a lot of spectrum on shame, but I think the takeaway message about shame is, it's you're not broken. None of us are broken. Like, we're either going to win or we're going to learn. There's feedback everywhere in our life, and we have to look at it. I think in my early days of recovery, I had a pathology of like, what's wrong with me, and now the conversation moves to rather what has happened to me, which is a whole
Mm.
different conversation.
Mm. I love that. I love that. You're not broken. That's the biggest takeaway here. And I wanted to just piggyback on what you said. You had mentioned that growing up, children were seen but not heard. And I have to relate to that. I'm telling you, I had mentioned that I'm a proud Latina, and Latino household, we're like that. We're like tough.
Mm-hmm.
You were sick. My mom used to say, go ahead and start doing chores or housework. So you can't be sitting around all day in bed. Or you're cried about something, get your act together, get over it, go ahead and do stuff around the house to make sure that you stay active, and push those emotions away. It's kind of like, it's sad. I feel like maybe that's maybe an 80s or 90s kid thing. But that's exactly how my household grew up. And we definitely see the effects of that now. And then now, as a mom myself of an older young adult, I try to kind of change those the way that I was raised. It's okay to tell him, I love you, son. Hey, drive safe. I hope you have a wonderful day at work. Stuff that you didn't get when you were a kid. It's just little things like that. And I'm so glad you brought that up, because I could relate. And I feel like a lot of our listeners, especially being Latinos, being blacks, or whatever you are, white, Hispanic, whatever, I think a lot of us could relate to that, because you are so right when you have mentioned children are seen but not heard. It's a lot. So
I
it's
really
definitely a lot.
I'm really glad you brought that up, because as I said, I was raised in London, England, and it was a time where it was that stiff British upper lip thing. And you're telling me
Oh wow.
it's in a lot of cultures, which
Yeah.
just shows that, like, it's being passed down from generation to generation. Like, these were perceived as weaknesses. You didn't air your dirty laundry. You pulled yourself together because you had to put on the stoic face. All the different things that come with, like, showing this front, right?
Yeah.
So that people won't see that the veneer is cracking, right? So
Yes. It is very crazy too. And I can only relate to that. And I don't mean to get off on a tangent here, but you were raised in London, in London, England. And during that period of time, I have a friend that she's rough. She's rough around the edges, but I love the heck out of her. I'll tell you that much. But she could definitely relate to that, upper English household. And her house bringing was very similar to ours. And she was like, her mom did not play around. She had six brothers and six brothers and six and sisters, so, and we always kid around because I love personalities, and she's like an ENTJ, and I'm
mhm.
an ENFJ when it comes to the Myers-Briggs personality thing. And she's just such a tough person. So I definitely see that in her as well. Now that you mention it, it just clicked, and I just thought about Clarence, and I was like, oh my God, that's my friend. Being raised like that in a strong English household, which is so funny. Oh my goodness. Let me ask you something, going back to that shame, because I don't know, something just kind of hit me right now. I mean, how does that guilt differ from shame in your experience? Like, being raised in like that difficult house setting and, recovery from your own substance abuse. How does that work?
So I think when you're in it, you don't know that this is your normal. So you just think it's your normal, and so you accept it as this is the way it is. But unless you start to see contrasts in other families or other relationships, you don't know that there's something wrong with it, right? And I
Yeah.
think guilt is when you've done something wrong, and shame is when you feel you are wrong. You're inherently flawed. There's inherently something wrong with you. And that, I'm sorry, is not something we're born with. We're born as these beautiful, flawless souls, right? These babies who have so much innocence in life. But once we have exposure to the world, and again, there's no fault here because it was never really designed to make people feel bad. But the messaging that we got and I would say this is globally, look at the state of the
Hmm.
world today. I think
Yeah.
that just exhibits how people feel about themselves. But the messages that we got were really inherently, we felt flawed, we felt less than, we felt that we could never get it right, we felt that there was something, I'm not enough. If you turned your head to the left or the right and saw someone else, you're not enough in a multitude of ways. You could fill in that blank hundreds of different ways, right? And I
Yeah.
think those are the messages we took from
Mm.
our environment. We learned it culturally at school. We learned it in our communities, whether it was religious communities. We learned it through our families. And so we started to own that, unfortunately, until we realized that it is, unfortunately, shame exasperates addiction. Shame exasperates the cycle of whatever's going on for that individual. Because when you feel that hopeless and when you feel that lousy about yourself, what do you want to do? You want to feel better, whether you're going to eat that chocolate cake or have that drink,
Yeah.
or act out and look for love in all the wrong places. That's
Mm.
what's going to happen.
Mm, 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 mm. I
And we
love
all
that.
do it
Yeah.
at some point in our lives
Mm.
until we know better.
And thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that for our listeners, as somebody that's going through that, like a guilt process, addiction, or that shame, trying to break that cycle. I want to definitely touch base on this, Jen, and talk about, just the overall recovery process, because I feel the passion that you have behind your work and it's beautiful. But what I love most about your work is how you incorporate that somatic healing
Hmm.
and you embody different practices, because you just not talk about therapy, but it's nervous system work that you do. You really,
Correct.
really do see the brilliance out of these people. It's more like a holistic approach. So let's talk about that a little bit. And why is that important to you to, you know, it's okay to help this person overcome this trauma, but then again, it's also good to help the nervous system and incorporate holistic approaches on there as well.
Absolutely. So there's a couple of points here. So when we're in talk therapy, we are in the paralysis of the analysis, right?
Yeah.
So we're talking about what happened, what goes back. And most people, myself in particular, worked very well from the neck up. As long as I didn't have to feel I could convince anybody of anything, or I could work my way through any situation. But when it came to feeling felt dangerous for me, especially for someone who has been abused. I would say sexually, for the simple reason that to feel does not feel safe, right?
Mhm.
But there's a couple of things here. When it comes to releasing trauma, trauma has its own history. So, and the history that it has is, you've heard it, the issues are in the tissues, trauma stored in the body. You must
Yeah.
have, right? You've heard these things. So, what it means is, when trauma is stored in the body, it remembers what they call neuroception, that sense of threat. Now, threat can be perceived or real. The body doesn't know the difference. Okay. So when
Okay.
I start to feel, and it could be I'm in a social situation or I'm in an intimate situation, and I'm, let's say, having an experience for the first time in this situation, and I start to feel something, it can feel like a historical moment. So you're not remembering it as, like, I'm not remembering it as sexual abuse, but what I'm remembering is the perceived threat of being preyed on, let's say, for want of a better word. So what happens is we need to feel in order to release that. But most people don't feel safe enough because our nervous system is dysregulated from the stress and the trauma of what we're thinking about. So the idea is we used to think that what's going on in our head would we work from the brain top down, but we're now finding out with polyvagal theory and nervous system regulation and somatic experiencing that we actually work from the bottom up. And what I mean by that is that we feel a perceived threat or some sensation in our body, even if it's subconscious, before the thought. It comes from the bottom, from the body first up to the brain. And so we may not always understand why suddenly we feel like we don't want to do something, or suddenly we feel frozen or stuck, or suddenly we feel compelled to move in the wrong direction and act out. Like, all of these things can play out in numerous different ways. But what they're teaching us is that really the body is trying to make us aware from the subconscious, bringing it into the conscious, and then the brain has, emotion and thought around it afterwards. There's
Interesting.
there's one other piece I want to mention to you that people
Yeah.
don't recognize is that we used to think that our brain is our primary brain. Our stomach, our gut, which you've heard, that gut instinct, gut feeling, has
Hmm.
tremendous neurotransmitters running through our stomachs. So we have all our chemistry, for example, our endorphins, our serotonin, our dopamine, all of that is happening in the stomach. So when somebody says they get a gut instinct, it's somewhat true that they're picking up on sensations around what is okay and not okay for them. Um, and the same thing with the heart. The heart has over 40,000 neurons. So they have neurons of just brain circuitries, brain neural pathways. So they're like brain signals. So when someone says they're heartbroken or lovesick,
Oh yeah, you
you know
feel
what
it.
that feeling. So
You
like,
feel it.
yeah, we didn't have language before this. And now that polyvagal is being discovered, which is a third branch of the nervous system, um, it's now all snapping into place like a jigsaw puzzle. So if you have a traumatic history, and there's trauma is spectrum, let's be honest. People have, I think you can't be alive without being, having some trauma, vicarious trauma
Hmm.
even. But there's spectrum. So the real way to talk therapy will only take you so far. And that was my experience. So I was going to talk therapy and getting worse and worse and worse. And nobody was telling, in the 90s, there was no other option. Like, nobody knew what somatic healing was. Nobody knew what nervous system regulation was. Nobody knew what polyvagal theory was. Not
Wow.
even being trauma informed. It's only become mainstream in the last, I would say, 10 years, even though it's been around for at least 20 plus.
Mm, that's amazing. That's crazy. And then again, I love it because I feel like one of the biggest takeaways here is that healing isn't just stopping the behavior. I feel like it's actually rewiring your safety net. I don't know.
Correct. You're
I feel
100%
like that.
right. Yeah.
I definitely feel like that's the biggest takeaway here because it really does. I mean, and I love how you mentioned that your heart, when you feel things in your heart and you're heartbroken, you're really
You know
heartbroken.
it,
Like,
right? You know it.
and then the gut feeling, that's amazing. Cause let me tell you, that gut feeling goes a long way and it protects you from a lot of things too, you know. That's amazing
Absolutely.
to know too. I just love that. And you had mentioned something there. I got some tidbits about relapse. Ooh, that's a big one. That's a big one, Jen, because there's so much fear about it, right? When especially so many people out there. Why do you think so many people are caught up in that cycle? This is the last time. And how do you help those clients just rebuild that trust with themselves?
Well, I think this is part of systemic stigma as well. So I'm not criticizing before I mention I go further. I'm just making myself. So in predominantly 12-step communities, there's this thing that if you don't do it a certain way, you can relapse and die. And that there is some truth to that for some people, but it doesn't apply to everybody. And it's used very like in an overarching way. So there comes this fear that people can, misstep and then die. So we don't take that lightly, but we have to look at what is the probability of that happening depending on the substance someone was using, right? So for
Yeah.
some people that could be very valid, but not everybody. Um, I think relapse needs to be looked at again. It's stigmatizing with the word relapse. It's like someone did something wrong. It's like someone did this on purpose. And typically, relapse happens on an emotional level before anyone picks up physically. So, for example, what I'm saying is if someone has a physical relapse and they indulge in a substance, let's say, let's just keep it to substance right now, they emotionally something was going on for them that they didn't pick up, whether it was sensations in the body, whether it was something, their thoughts and emotions in their brain.
Hmm.
Something happened before they physically picked up and ingested a drug or had a drink or whatever it was they were doing. So the emotional relapse is always precedes the physical relapse. And so this is why it's so important to understand thyself and really kind of know what's going on for you and what you're feeling and get comfortable with feeling that. Because if you're avoiding yourself, which some people do, and I spent most of my life doing that, so I'm really good at that, trying to outrun yourself and pretend that you're okay when you're not okay, because eventually we try to convince ourselves we're okay with certain situations and we're really not until eventually we can't stomach it anymore, whatever
Yeah.
it is, whether it's the relationship or whatever's going on.
Oh
So we
man.
really have to be honest with ourselves, and I think that's the most important thing. And we're not good at that, especially if we're chameleons, and people in addiction are very adaptable. That's how they keep the addiction going alive for a long period of time until it stops them, right? It breaks them.
Hmm. So, like, let's say, you had mentioned the relapse part of it being the stigma. I mean, you
Yeah,
had
I wanted to
mentioned,
mention something over that. So before
yeah,
you go on, so
no, no,
we
no,
still
please go.
call it relapse. In
Hmm.
every other medical condition, we're calling it a reoccurrence. If you have cancer and it goes into remission, and it
Ah,
comes back, it's called a reoccurrence.
yes.
We're not saying relapse. We're not stigmatizing the client, the patient. We do in
Mm.
recovery. Why? So this is a big part of when I talk about systemic stigma. This is like some of these things are starting to change, but they're not mainstream enough everywhere. So the
Mm.
language is starting to change from addict to addiction to someone who has a substance use disorder, but
Mm.
it's still not mainstream enough.
And so many things have changed too in society now. I think, honestly, I feel like we live now in a very sensitive society. That's how I feel like that. Like,
Yes.
like what we did in the 90s or early 2000s, a lot of that stuff or a lot of those jargons that we use, as you mentioned, wouldn't survive now, So that's also very important as time change. And like, I feel like recovery and relapse or reoccurrence is it's forever evolving, right?
Hmm.
That's amazing. That it's just amazing to me. You said something very powerful as I've been following your journey here, that you don't need to be an expert in mental health. You just need to align with one. I love that. I love that, Jen.
Thank you.
I think that definitely sets you apart from so many different people's that passion behind it. But what would be your suggestion for a listener, for someone that needs to take the first step if they're feeling stuck because they have a substance abuse or they're going through something right now, for our listeners?
So, a couple of things I would say regarding that. One is trust your instincts. I can't emphasize that enough. And if you ask yourself the question, is there a time in your life where you ever trusted your instincts or mistrusted your instincts and wish you had of? The answer probably would be yes, but I would ask the listener for them to acknowledge that to themselves, because that would probably give them more confidence to move forward and trust their instincts. We may not know why we know something, and it lacks sense, common sense, but somehow we do know, and so we need to trust that. The most important thing in terms of starting a therapeutic relationship, a coaching relationship with someone, is They say it's not expertise in therapy. They say it's connection is the fit. Does this person make me feel safe? Because if you have a good rapport with a therapist coming right out of the gate, the chances are you'll do excellent work. Even if they may not be the most skilled at everything they do, you'll do excellent work. And that has been
Mhm.
documented in many different evidence-based practices, that the rapport with the practitioner is far more important than the skill set. So trust yourself. Sometimes we don't need the most highly credentialed. We need someone who is compassionate, makes us feel safe, is collaborating with us, is not top down telling us the answers, is allowing us space to think for the answers ourselves, let them come to us. It's just a very different approach, rather than outsourcing your therapeutic process to an expert and it's top down, and that could be even in the finding of it. So you want to have a good match, and you don't have to get it perfect. So this is not about perfection. This is about just knowing, intuitively knowing that this is a good fit for you or not, and
Mm.
trusting
Finding somebody that you just feel trustworthy with, like,
that.
safe, or creating a safe space pretty much,
You
that's
have to
very
feel safe,
important.
otherwise you can't do the work, right? You're just
Yeah,
going to show
yeah.
a part of yourself, and that's not going to work.
Yeah, I like that. I love that. And then again, you mentioned something, a therapist who's driven and like really passionate of what they do. Jen, you definitely encompass that passionate, love for this work and trying to help these individuals. And I think a lot of therapists out there may be lacking that, and maybe that's why people feel fear, going into therapy today and days. So definitely very good to know too. Jen,
Thank you.
before we move on into, I want to do some rapid hard questions. I just started
Yeah.
that segment in my podcast, but before I do that, or we transition to that, I want to let our listeners know where can they find you and how they could reach your recovery concierge, and how can they or their loved ones get support, or somebody suffering out there right now. Where can they find you?
So the easiest place to find me is at therecoveryconcierge.com, and you can email info@therecoveryconcierge.com, and you'll be able to find me and contact me.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And you're also on Instagram, I see. You're on Facebook. I mean, remember, this is to our listeners, the recoveryconcierge.com. So you're pretty much out there too. So there's definitely ways where we could find you. Do
Thank you.
you have anything in the pipeline, Jen, coming? Like any books, anything, any suggestions, or what's in the
Absolutely.
pipeline for you?
So the pipeline has two questionnaires, one for practitioners, scorecards, where we're going to take people through a process to find out where there are gaps in their therapeutic process. And the same for individuals who are on a self discovery journey, where are their gaps in there. And so that will be coming within the next month. And I am just in the process of writing an outline for a book as we speak.
Oh, good for you. When can we expect that? If you don't know a date, just give us an approximate
I
date.
would say before 2026 is out. Thank
Woo, girl, congratulations to that. I
you.
love that. That's like a big milestone or a big stepping stone to writing your book. But I mean, I can see why. I mean, you've done beautiful work and you have personal experience behind that. So we definitely look forward for that. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Now, I want to transition to some rapid hard questions. I just started this. I don't know why
Okay.
it's fun.
Sounds
And
fun.
I am going to like just say, or actually just say five questions out there, and I want you to give me your honest response just really quick. So, the first one word you associate with recovery and why?
Hmm. One word. So I'm a bit slow coming out of the gate. Just give me a second.
Take your time, my dear. Take your
Oh my
time.
goodness, I'm full in a blank. I never do that. One word I would associate recovery. I just think it's the most beautiful thing. So ever evolving. It's
Ever evolving.
it's
Mm.
becomes about, I would say, consciousness. It's coming from the dark into the light. So consciousness. It's, and the reason why is you don't know what you don't know until you're on the other side.
Consciousness. Okay. Number two, a daily grounding practice you personally use. We want to know what you're doing, girl.
I set myself up every morning for some daily practice, whether it's personal reflection and readings, whether it's apps, whether it's breathing, whether it's meditation, movement. And that's the first 15 to 30 minutes of my day is me before I go out into the world and become someone else's agenda.
I like that. I like that. And number three here, boundaries or compassion? I mean, which one comes first? That's kind of deep.
Okay, so for
I'm gonna
me,
take you there.
passion, I'm learning boundaries. Still always something to learn, as you know. Um, I find that people who are, hurting in some way, not that everyone's walking around hurting, but I do think that if we're getting honest with ourselves, there's wounded parts of ourselves. And it's not
Mm.
that we're completely wounded, it's that there's parts that are wounded. So for me, compassion has really been how I move forward. It's what I needed. And not saying that I didn't get compassion, I was just brought up in a way that really taught you to pull it together and ignore what was going on emotionally. So that's why I'm a big proponent for compassion.
Mm. And I have four here. I have two more actually.
Go
I'm in
ahead.
number four. So, what does emotional sobriety mean in one sentence? I know we touched deep into that,
Ooh.
but tell me in one sentence if you could think about that.
Emotional sobriety is being able to hold on to yourself emotionally when your world isn't working well and you're being triggered or activated by other people's behaviors.
I love that, Jane. I love that. And then the last one, a message for someone listening who feels hopeless right now. They need to hear a message.
No matter what you've done before, no matter where you are in your journey, no matter what your name, your history, you have an opportunity to rewrite your story. And the only thing you need to do is have the faith and hope that it can be different.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's so beautiful. I wish I could have like a moment to write it all down because I love that. I love that. That was beautiful. Jen, I just want to thank you for holding this space for such a hard conversation that it needs to be talked about more. It needs to be talked about more. We need to continue to raise awareness. I feel like you're reminding us that relapse doesn't mean failure for a lot of people that are listening. And I feel like you're helping so many people. I want to thank you for helping people move from shape to sobriety, that which is excellent. So I want to thank you so much for deciding to share my podcast to tell your story and also continue to talk about addiction, substance abuse, and everything that you went through, what you're doing right now. So I want to thank you so much for that. This has been awesome.
Oh my God, Iris, thank you so much for letting me lend my voice. And I appreciate you as much as you appreciate me. So thank you again.
Of course. Mi gente bonita, if you're struggling, please know that you're not alone. Healing is possible, recovery is possible. This has been Conversations with Iris. Until next time, my audience members, keep healing, keep growing, and remember, you deserve a life that feels free. Thank you all. Adios.